There are some things in this world that hold more than just their physical form. A faded photograph isn't just paper and ink, it's a captured moment of laughter. A worn armchair isn't just wood and fabric, it's the cradle of 1,000 quiet evenings. And in my little kitchen, warmed by the afternoon sun and the lingering scent of cinnamon and memory, the most precious object in my world wasn't made of gold or silver. It was made of paper, bound in cracked leather, and filled with the soul of the man I loved. It was Arthur's recipe book. If you're listening to this story today, please take a moment to subscribe and perhaps share a treasured memory of your own in the comments below. This is a story about how a legacy, carefully written in a husband's loving hand, was deemed worthless and thrown into the trash. And how, from that very trash, a quiet promise blossomed into a victory no one ever saw coming. Arthur was never a famous chef. He never craved the spotlight or the thunderous applause of a television studio. His applause was the contented sigh of a friend after a good meal, the smile on my face as I tasted his latest creation. He was a culinary artist whose gallery was our small, welcoming kitchen. For 40 years, he poured his genius not onto a public stage, but onto the pages of this simple, leather-bound journal. Each page is a conversation with him. His elegant, slightly slanted handwriting fills the margins. "Rosemary, my love." One note begins, next to his recipe for beef bourguignon. "Remember, the secret is patience. Don't you dare rush the browning of the beef. That's where the flavor is born." Next to his legendary apple pie recipe, he'd sketched a tiny, smiling apple. "For my beautiful Rosemary," it reads, "the only thing sweeter than this pie." The book isn't just a collection of instructions, it's the story of our life together. The scent of vanilla on page 42 brings back the memory of our son David's 5th birthday. The faint, ghostly stain of wine on page 110 is from the night we celebrated our 25th anniversary, dancing in this very kitchen. Holding this book was like holding Arthur's hand. It was my most sacred connection to him, the last, tangible piece of his heart. Which is why the phone call from my son, David, filled me with a familiar mix of love and a gentle, aching dread. "Mom? Hi, it's me." "David, dear. How wonderful to hear your voice," I said, wiping a dusting of flour from my hands onto my apron. I was in the middle of attempting Arthur's sourdough, a recipe so complex it felt more like a scientific experiment. "Listen, Vanessa and I were thinking of stopping by for dinner on Friday. If you're not busy?" My heart did a little leap of joy, immediately followed by a cautious dip. Seeing David was the highlight of my month. Seeing Vanessa was a different matter. My daughter-in-law is what you might call a woman of the moment. She's a lifestyle influencer, a curator of minimalist aesthetics. Her world is one of clean lines, beige tones, and food that is often deconstructed, activated, or turned into some sort of tasteless foam. It is a world where a lovingly prepared pot roast is seen not as comfort, but as a caloric liability. I remember her visiting for the first time after the wedding. I had spent 2 days making Arthur's lasagna, a glorious, bubbling masterpiece of homemade pasta, slow-simmered ragu, and creamy bechamel. Vanessa had looked at the generous portion on her plate with the wary expression of someone being presented with a live explosive. "Oh, wow," she'd said, pushing it around with her fork. "That's a lot of gluten." She ate 2 bites and declared herself full. "Of course, I'm not busy, dear," I told David, forcing a brightness into my voice. "I would love to have you both." "Great. We'll see you around 7. As soon as I hung up, my eyes fell on Arthur's book, open on the counter. A wave of defensiveness washed over me. I felt a sudden, fierce need to protect it, to protect his memory from the cool, dismissive judgment of Vanessa's world. I decided then and there what I would make. I would make his signature dish, coq au vin, a classic, robust, and unapologetically traditional chicken stew, simmered for hours in red wine and brandy. It was the first meal he ever cooked for me. It was a dish that tasted of love and time, 2 things Vanessa seemed to have very little patience for. On Friday, my little apartment was filled with the rich, intoxicating aroma of the stew. I set the table with my best china, the one with the little blue flowers that Vanessa had once called terribly quaint. By the time the doorbell rang, I felt a nervous warmth in my chest. David greeted me with a hug that felt genuine but brief. Behind him stood Vanessa, a vision in a stark, cream-colored pantsuit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment used to be. She held out a bottle of wine, not to me, but placed it on the counter. "It's organic," she said, as if that explained everything. The dinner was, as always, a minefield of passive aggression. David, to his credit, took one bite of the coq au vin and his eyes closed in pleasure. "Oh, Mom," he sighed. This tastes like home, just like Dad used to make." I felt a bloom of pride in my chest, but it was quickly wilted by Vanessa. "It's flavorful," she said, picking a single pearl onion out of her bowl. "A bit heavy for my palate, though, all that butter and wine. My nutritionist says that traditional French cooking is essentially a heart attack on a plate." She smiled sweetly as she said it. David, hearing his wife's critique, immediately backpedaled. "Well, yeah, it's definitely a cheat meal," he said quickly, looking at Vanessa for approval. "But delicious, for a special occasion." I said nothing, just stirred my stew. The conversation moved on to Vanessa's latest brand partnership, a new line of air purifiers that, she claimed, could eliminate all toxins and negative energy from a room. I looked around my home, filled with old books, framed photos, and the rich smell of Arthur's cooking, and I wondered if I was the negative energy she wanted to purify. After dinner, as I was clearing the plates, I saw Vanessa wandering around my living room, her eyes scanning my belongings with the detached air of a museum curator about to deaccession an entire wing. Her gaze landed on the mantelpiece, on the small collection of Arthur's favorite things I kept there, and then her eyes narrowed. She had found it. She walked over to the kitchen counter where I had left Arthur's recipe book. She picked it up, holding it with 2 fingers as if it were contaminated. "What's this old thing?" she asked, her voice laced with a condescending curiosity. Before I could answer, she began to flip through the pages, her perfectly manicured nails a stark alien presence on the soft, worn paper. A small, dry laugh escaped her lips. "My goodness," she said, not to me, but to David, who had just walked in. "Look at this, honey, handwritten. All these ancient recipes. So much lard. Is this what you grew up on? It's a miracle your cholesterol isn't through the roof." I felt my breath catch in my throat. I stood frozen by the sink, my hands dripping with soapy water. I wanted to scream, to snatch the book from her hands. But I couldn't move. David just shrugged, a helpless gesture I knew all too well. Dad loved to cook, Vanessa. That book was his whole life. "It's cute," she said, the word dripping with dismissal. She closed the book and placed it back on the counter, but with a slight push, as if to distance herself from it. She looked at me then, a bright, false smile plastered on her face. "You know, Rosemary," she said, her tone suddenly shifting to one of helpful concern. "I could help you digitize the few recipes that are worth keeping, and then we could, get rid of all this old clutter." She gestured vaguely at the book, at my life, at everything that mattered to me. And in that moment, I knew. I knew this wasn't just about a book. This was about erasure. She wanted to erase Arthur. She wanted to erase the humble, flower-dusted past that I represented. I spent the rest of the evening in a quiet daze, and when they finally left, the silence in my apartment was deafening. I walked over to the counter and picked up the book. I held it to my chest, and for the first time since he died, I felt a cold, terrifying wave of despair. It felt like his legacy, our legacy, was a flickering candle in a storm, and a cruel wind was doing its very best to blow it out. The week that followed that disastrous dinner was filled with a heavy silence. David didn't call. I suppose he was either too ashamed or too afraid to face me. I found myself retreating further into my little world, holding Arthur's recipe book a little tighter, reading his words as if they were a shield against the creeping chill of Vanessa's influence. I cooked his recipes not just for sustenance, but for defiance. Each perfectly roasted chicken, each flaky pastry was a silent testament to a legacy she couldn't understand. Then, the following Saturday, the storm I had been bracing for finally arrived. It came in the form of a cheerful, utterly disingenuous phone call from Vanessa. "Rosemary, hi." Her voice was syrupy sweet. "David and I are running some errands near your neighborhood, and I had a wonderful idea. I know how much you've been wanting to declutter and modernize a bit, so I thought, why don't I pop over for an hour and help you get started? We can sort through some of that old stuff." My blood ran cold. Declutter, modernize, old stuff. They were all code words. Code for erasing Arthur, code for erasing me. 1,000 excuses ran through my mind. I could say I was feeling unwell, that I had an appointment, that the building was being fumigated. But I heard the exhaustion in my own heart. I was 70 years old. I was tired of fighting shadows. And a small, treacherous part of me wondered, maybe if I just let her in, if I let her change a few things, maybe she would finally soften. Maybe she would finally accept me. It was the eternal foolish hope of a mother. "That's thoughtful of you, Vanessa," I said, the words feeling like ash in my mouth. "I suppose the pantry could use some reorganizing." "Perfect," she chirped. "We'll be there in 20. She arrived not with David, but alone. She was dressed in pristine white athletic wear, her hair pulled back in a severe ponytail. She looked less like she was here to help and more like she was here to conduct a military inspection. She breezed past me into the living room, carrying 3 large, empty cardboard boxes. "Donation, recycling, and trash," she announced, setting them down with 3 decisive thuds. "Every item in a home should either be beautiful, useful, or sentimental. Let's see what we can streamline." She started with the bookshelf, her movements swift and brutal. She pulled out Arthur's old collection of poetry books. "Dust collectors," she declared, tossing them into the donation box. "A small, carved wooden duck Arthur had bought me at a country fair? Doesn't fit the minimalist aesthetic." Into the donation box it went. With each item she discarded, it felt like she was tearing a page out of the story of my life. I stood by, a silent, helpless ghost in my own home, my protests dying in my throat. I thought, foolishly, that the kitchen would be my sanctuary. It was my domain. Surely, she wouldn't dare. I was wrong. She opened my pantry and audibly gasped. "Oh, Rosemary, all this white flour, white sugar, canned goods. This is a nutritional wasteland." She began pulling things out with a look of disgust, piling them onto the counter. My meticulously stocked pantry, the heart of my cooking, was being dismantled as if it were a crime scene. And then, she saw it. Sitting on its own small shelf, a place of honor, was Arthur's recipe book. "Right," she said, her voice brisk and businesslike. "Let's deal with this." She took the book down from the shelf. She held it differently this time, not with 2 fingers, but with a firm, proprietary grip. The casual disdain from the week before was gone, replaced by a cold, surgical purpose. "I've been thinking a lot about this," she said, not looking at me, but at the book. "And I've realized it's not healthy for you to be so attached to the past. All these heavy, butter-laden recipes, they represent a lifestyle that's, frankly, gone. It's time to embrace the future. Clean eating, simplicity." My voice was a strangled whisper. "Vanessa, please. That book it's all I have left of him." She finally looked at me. There was no sympathy in her eyes, only a patronizing pity that was 1,000 times more cruel. "That's exactly the problem, Rosemary. It's a crutch. You need to move on. David worries about you, you know. He says you're stuck." She walked over to the large black trash bag she had propped open by the door. It was already half full of my pantry staples, my spices, the things she had deemed unworthy. The world seemed to slow down. I saw her hand, holding the book over the gaping mouth of the trash bag. I saw the cracked leather cover, the faint gold lettering of Arthur's initials that had long since faded. I saw my entire life, my entire marriage, suspended over a void of coffee grounds and discarded vegetable peels. "No," I said, the word a tiny, powerless sound. "Please, Vanessa, not that. Anything but that." She looked me straight in the eye, a flicker of something cold and triumphant in her gaze. She wanted me to beg. She wanted me to break. "It's just paper, Rosemary," she said softly, her voice a cruel parody of gentleness. and then she spoke the words that would be seared into my memory forever. "It's useless, sentimental junk." And with that, she opened her hand. I didn't hear it land. I only saw it disappear. Arthur's book, his soul, my heart, it vanished into the darkness of the bag. I must have made some sound, a choked gasp or a sob, because David chose that exact moment to walk through the door. "Hey, everything okay in here?" he asked, looking at the chaos in the kitchen. He saw the look on my face. He saw the trash bag. He saw Vanessa standing there, her expression one of righteous accomplishment. "Vanessa," he said, a note of uncertainty in his voice, "what did you do?" "I'm helping your mother move into the 21st century, David," she said calmly. "We're just clearing out some old things that are holding her back." "That book," David said, his eyes wide as he finally understood. "Dad's book? You didn't—" "It was clutter, honey," she said, walking over to him and placing a hand on his arm, a gesture of both affection and control. "It's for the best. We can find all these recipes online anyway, better versions probably." I looked at my son. I saw the conflict in his eyes, the memory of his father warring with the will of his wife. I saw him open his mouth, a protest forming on his lips. But then he looked at Vanessa. He saw her sharp, warning gaze, and the protest died. He just deflated. "Oh," he said, the sound utterly empty. "Okay, well, if you think it's for the best." That was it. That was the moment my heart truly broke. It wasn't just Vanessa's cruelty. It was David's silence, his willing surrender. He had stood by and watched her throw his own father's legacy into the garbage. Vanessa smiled, her victory complete. She tied the top of the black bag with a swift, final knot. "There," she said brightly. "All done. See how much cleaner and more positive the energy is in here already?" She left the bag by the back door, ready for the morning trash collection. Then she kissed a stunned and silent David on the cheek, told me I had been a superstar, and left, her work of cultural cleansing complete. I stood in the wreckage of my kitchen, the ghost of my son lingering by the door, and I felt a coldness I had not known since the day Arthur died. She hadn't just thrown away a book, she had thrown away my life. And she had done it with a smile. After they left, the silence in my apartment was a physical presence. It was a thick, suffocating blanket that smelled of Vanessa's expensive, sterile perfume. I didn't clean the kitchen. I couldn't. I simply walked over to Frank's old armchair and sat down, staring at the black plastic bag by the door. It sat there like a dark, swollen tombstone, marking the grave of my past. Hours passed. The sun set, and the familiar, comforting shadows of evening filled my living room, but they brought no comfort. Sleep was an impossible thought. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it. The book falling, disappearing into the darkness. I heard her voice echoing in the quiet of my mind. Useless, sentimental junk. Was that what my life with Arthur had become? Junk? Was our love, our shared history, our quiet, happy world just clutter to be streamlined by the cold, efficient hands of the next generation? David's surrender played over and over again in my thoughts, each replay a fresh stab of betrayal. He hadn't just let her throw away a book, he had let her throw me away. Sometime after midnight, a new feeling began to stir beneath the suffocating layers of grief and shock. It started as a small, flickering ember in the pit of my stomach. It was anger, a cold, quiet, and deeply profound anger I hadn't felt in decades. It wasn't a loud, screaming rage. It was a focused, clarifying fire. It burned away the tears. It burned away the helplessness. I would not let her have the final word. I would not let Arthur's legacy end in a landfill, mixed with coffee grounds and her condescending pity. My bare feet made no sound on the cool wooden floor as I walked to the back door. My hands were steady as I untied the knot. Vanessa had tied so triumphantly. The smell of garbage hit me, a vile mix of discarded food and the cloying scent of Vanessa's organic kale. I plunged my hands in, ignoring the grime and the dampness, my fingers searching desperately through the refuse. And then, I felt it. The familiar, cracked leather of the spine. My heart seized. I pulled it out. The book was soiled, stained with coffee, and smelled faintly of decay. But it was there. It was whole. I held it to my chest, a survivor rescued from the wreckage. I carried it to the kitchen sink as if it were a wounded soldier. The next 2 hours were a meticulous, sacred ritual. With a soft, damp cloth and a patience born of pure love, I began to clean it. I blotted the coffee stains from the cover. I carefully wiped every single page, my fingers tracing Arthur's familiar handwriting. I saw his notes, his little sketches, peeking through the grime. More butter, my love. Always more butter. I could almost hear his voice, a warm and gentle whisper from the past. As I worked, something shifted inside me. My tears of sorrow, which had been frozen inside me for hours, finally began to fall. But they were different now. They weren't tears of a victim. They were hot tears of rage, of defiance. Each page I cleaned was an act of rebellion. I was not just cleaning a book. I was reclaiming my history. I was polishing my armor. With the first light of dawn streaking the sky, the book was as clean as I could make it. It was still stained, still scarred. But to me, it was more beautiful than ever. The stains were no longer marks of desecration. They were battle scars, a testament to its survival. I sat down at my kitchen table, the restored book open before me, and a profound sense of clarity washed over me. Confronting Vanessa would be pointless. Arguing with David would be heartbreaking. Words were useless against their brand of willful ignorance. If I was to make them understand, if I was to truly honor Arthur, I couldn't tell them the value of this book. I had to show them. Exhausted but wired, I turned on the small television in my living room, just for some background noise. I was flipping through the channels when a commercial came on. It was loud and flashy, filled with dramatic music and sizzling pans. "Do you have what it takes to be America's next culinary champion?" a booming voiceover asked. Images of chefs, their faces glistening with sweat and concentration, flashed across the screen. "Are you sitting on a secret that could change the way we eat? Then enter America's Hearth, the nation's most beloved cooking competition." The camera zoomed in on the head judge, a formidable-looking man with piercing eyes named Julian Croft. He was a world-renowned chef, a notorious purist who disdained culinary fads and worshipped at the altar of classic technique. "We're looking for authenticity," Croft said to the camera, his voice a low growl. "We're looking for food with soul. We're looking for a winner to award the grand prize of $1 million. Normally, I would have laughed and changed the channel. It was a world as alien to me as Vanessa's. But in that moment, sitting in the pre-dawn glow, my husband's rescued legacy lying open on the table, a wild, audacious, and utterly terrifying idea took root in my mind. Food with soul. Authenticity. A secret that could change the way we eat. I had all of those things. They were right here, in this book. Vanessa had called it useless junk. The world had moved on, she'd said. But what if she was wrong? What if the world wasn't tired of the old ways, but was starving for them? My hands were trembling as I reached for my laptop. I had never been a gambler. I had never sought the spotlight. My entire life had been lived in the gentle, supporting role of a wife and mother. But the woman who had sat silently while her past was thrown in the trash was gone. A new woman sat in her place, one forged in the quiet fury of a midnight rescue. I found the application website for America's Hearth. The deadline was in 2 days. With a heart that was pounding with a mixture of terror and exhilarating purpose, I began to type. Name: Rosemary Evans. What is your culinary philosophy? To prove that the most timeless recipes are not made with fancy equipment or trendy ingredients, but with patience, memory, and a whole lot of butter. I hit submit. The sun was fully up now, flooding my small kitchen with golden light. It felt like a benediction. I looked from the laptop screen to Arthur's book. I didn't know if they would even accept my application. I didn't know if I had the strength to compete against professional chefs. But in that moment, none of it mattered. For the first time in 5 years, I wasn't just looking back at the past. I was fighting for its future. To say I was surprised when I received the email with the subject line, "Welcome to America's Hearth," would be an understatement. I was utterly, profoundly shocked. I read it 3 times, my heart thudding against my ribs, convinced it was a mistake. They had invited me, a 70-year-old widow from a quiet neighborhood, to compete on a national stage against a field of ambitious young chefs with culinary degrees, television-ready smiles, and tweezers in their knife kits. My secret weapon wasn't a sous vide machine or a canister of liquid nitrogen. It was a stained, leather-bound book written by a man no one had ever heard of. It felt like I was being asked to bring a slingshot to a cannon fight. The first day on set was terrifying. The studio was a cavernous, intimidating space, buzzing with an energy that was both electric and overwhelming. It was a blur of bright lights, massive cameras that glided like silent predators, and the controlled chaos of a production crew. I stood in my simple, clean apron, a small island of quiet in an ocean of noise and youthful ambition. The other contestants looked me over with a mixture of curiosity and dismissal. I could hear their whispers. "Is she a guest judge?" one asked. "Maybe she's someone's grandmother, here for support," another suggested. No one saw me as a competitor. To them, I was a quaint, harmless prop, and I was happy to let them think so. My first phone call with David after being accepted was awkward. "A cooking show, Mom?" he'd said, his voice a cocktail of disbelief and concern. "Like, on television? Are you sure that's a good idea? It's a lot of pressure." I could hear the unspoken words, "You're too old. You'll be embarrassed." And I could hear Vanessa's voice, a faint, condescending murmur in the background, undoubtedly feeding him his lines. "I think it will be a wonderful new experience, dear," I said, my voice calm and steady. "I just want to cook." The first challenge was to create a modern twist on a classic comfort food. A young chef with a gravity-defying haircut made a deconstructed mac and cheese, which looked like a sad little puddle of orange foam next to a single, lonely noodle. Another contestant presented a meatloaf that had been cooked sous vide for 72 hours. It was technically perfect, but it had the soul of a spreadsheet. I took a deep breath, opened Arthur's book to page 27, and made his shepherd's pie. There was no foam. There was no deconstruction. It was just a rich, savory lamb stew, fragrant with rosemary and thyme from my own garden, topped with a cloud of the creamiest, most buttery mashed potatoes imaginable, baked until the peaks were a perfect, golden brown. It was the dish Arthur used to make me on cold, rainy nights. When I presented it to the judges, the other contestants snickered. It looked so simple, so old-fashioned. The head judge, Julian Croft, stared at the dish for a long moment, his famously stern face unreadable. He took a single, deliberate bite. The studio was silent. He closed his eyes. A slow, almost imperceptible nod was his only movement. "In a world that is obsessed with being clever," he said, his deep voice resonating through the studio, "you have dared to be honest." He looked directly at me, and for the first time, I felt seen. "This is not just food. This is a memory. This is hearth. You are safe, for now." And so it began. Week after week, I became the quiet surprise of the competition. While others chased trends, I delved deeper into Arthur's book. I made his flaky, melt-in-your-mouth chicken pot pie, a recipe he spent a decade perfecting. I baked his 6-layer coconut cake, so light it felt like eating a cloud. I roasted a duck with a cherry sauce, so perfectly balanced it made one of the younger judges, a fiery celebrity chef known for her brutal critiques, actually tear up. "It tastes like my childhood," she'd whispered. I never mentioned Arthur by name. I never mentioned the book. When they asked about my inspiration, I would simply smile and say, "I learned from a very patient, very brilliant teacher a long time ago." The book remained my secret, wrapped in a clean dish towel at my station, my silent partner in every challenge. I became the season's beloved underdog. The viewers called me America's grandma. My quiet confidence, my refusal to engage in the drama and backstabbing that often plagued the show, seemed to resonate with people. I wasn't playing a game. I was just cooking from my heart. The further I advanced, the more frantic the phone calls from David became. His initial skepticism had morphed into a panicked confusion. "Mom, you're winning," he'd say, as if it were an anomaly of nature, like a river flowing uphill. "Vanessa and I saw the last episode. Her friends are all talking about you. Vanessa thinks it's interesting." Interesting. That was the word she used. Not wonderful, not amazing. Interesting. Like I was a strange new species she was observing from a safe distance. As I made it to the final 4, then the final 3, a new plan began to form in my mind. A plan to bring my story full circle. I wanted Vanessa to be there. I wanted her to see. I wanted her to witness, with her own 2 eyes, the fate of the useless junk she had thrown in the trash. The day I found out I had made it to the live finale, I did 2 things. First, I called the show's producers and made a special request for a single, front-row ticket to be held under my name. Second, I wrote a short, simple note on a piece of my best stationery. The next day, a courier delivered a small, elegant envelope to Vanessa's gleaming, minimalist home. Inside was the ticket. And my note. It contained only 4 words. A gift for you. I didn't need to sign it. She would know who it was from. It wasn't an invitation. It was a summons. I was no longer the victim, a silent ghost in my own home. I was a finalist in a national competition, and I was setting the stage for my own final act. On the night of the finale, as I stood backstage, my heart was a hummingbird in my chest. I could hear the roar of the live studio audience. I peeked through the curtain, and I saw her. Vanessa was sitting in the front row, exactly where I knew she would be. She was dressed in a severe all-black outfit, her arms crossed, a look of bored skepticism on her face. She was here not to cheer, but to judge. To witness the moment her strange, old-fashioned mother-in-law would finally be put in her place. David sat beside her, looking pale and nervous. I took a deep breath and clutched the worn leather of Arthur's book, hidden beneath my apron. This wasn't just for the $1 million. This wasn't even just for me. This was for Arthur. This was for every forgotten recipe, for every quiet legacy, for every person who had ever been told that the things they cherish are worthless. The stage manager's voice crackled. "Rosemary, you're on in 5. I closed my eyes and whispered into the silence. "Okay, Arthur, my love. Let's go cook them one last meal." Walking onto that stage was like stepping into another universe. The heat from the studio lights was a physical presence, the noise from the crowd a tidal wave of sound. Across from me stood my final competitor, a young chef named Antoine. He was the season's villain, arrogant, brilliant, and a devotee of the kind of theatrical cooking Vanessa would have adored. His station was a mad scientist's laboratory of blowtorches, smoke guns, and syringes. My station had a stove, a cutting board, and a set of well-loved copper pans. The host, a man with a smile as bright and artificial as the lights above, stood between us. "Welcome, America, to the live finale of America's Hearth," he boomed. "Tonight, one of these incredible chefs will walk away with the title and the grand prize of $1 million. My eyes found Vanessa in the front row. She was whispering something to David, a condescending smirk on her face as she gestured towards Antoine's futuristic setup. She wouldn't even look at me. To her, the outcome was a foregone conclusion. I was the sentimental sideshow. He was the main event. "The final challenge is simple," the host continued. "In 3 hours, you will create a single spectacular dish, a dish that tells us who you are, a dish that represents your heart on a plate. Your time starts now." A klaxon blared. Antoine immediately grabbed a canister of liquid nitrogen. I simply took a deep, steadying breath. I knew exactly what I was going to make. I had known it from the moment I sent Vanessa that ticket. I reached beneath my apron and placed Arthur's book on my station. Then I began to cook. I pulled out a heavy, cast-iron pot, onions, carrots, mushrooms, and a beautiful plump chicken. The camera zoomed in, and a confused murmur rippled through the audience. Amidst the pyrotechnics of modern cuisine, I was making a simple stew. One of the roving hosts, a bubbly food blogger, came to my station. "Rosemary, an interesting choice for the finale. It looks very rustic. What are you making for us?" I looked directly into the camera, knowing exactly who was watching. "I'm making coq au vin," I said, my voice clear and strong. "It's a classic French dish, simmered in red wine and brandy. It was my late husband's signature recipe. It was the first meal he ever cooked for me." I saw a flicker of movement in the front row. Vanessa, who had been engrossed in her phone, slowly looked up, Her bored expression faltered, replaced by a flicker of disbelief. David was staring at me, his face pale. I had just announced to a national audience that I was making the very dish they had scorned in my home. For the next 3 hours, I was in a world of my own. The noise of the studio faded away. The cameras disappeared. It was just me, the memory of Arthur, and the familiar, comforting steps of his most beloved recipe. I browned the chicken with the patience he had taught me, coaxing out a deep mahogany crust. I flambéed the brandy, the burst of blue flame a silent salute to his showmanship. The rich, intoxicating aroma began to fill the studio, a stark contrast to the sterile, chemical smells coming from Antoine's station. It was the scent of home, the scent of love. With 10 seconds left on the clock, I carefully placed a single, perfect sprig of thyme on top of the stew. "Time's up!" the host yelled. The judging was a tense affair. They tasted Antoine's dish first. It was called Essence of the Forest Floor, a bizarre creation of mushroom foam, edible soil, and a quail egg suspended in a sphere of gelatin. Julian Croft, the head judge, tasted it, his face a mask of stone. "It is clever, Chef Antoine," he said finally. "But it has no soul. It is a dish that makes me think. It does not make me feel." Then they turned to me. 3 pristine white bowls of my coq au vin were placed before them. Julian Croft picked up his spoon. He didn't just taste it, he inhaled the aroma, letting the steam wash over his face. He took a bite of the chicken, which was so tender it fell apart at the touch of his spoon. He ate a pearl onion, a mushroom. The notoriously stern judge put his spoon down, and he smiled. It was a small, quiet, and utterly genuine smile. "Rosemary," he said, his voice softer than I had ever heard it. "In the past 20 years, I have eaten in the finest restaurants in the world. I have tasted dishes of unimaginable complexity. But this is, without a doubt, one of the best things I have ever eaten." He looked at the other judges, who were nodding in stunned agreement. This dish is not a trend, it is a truth. It is a testament to the fact that perfect technique, combined with the finest ingredients and a great deal of patience, is, and always will be, the soul of great cooking. It is, in a word, flawless. The host, sensing the moment, rushed forward. "The judges have made their decision," he announced, his voice trembling with manufactured excitement. "The winner of America's Hearth and $1 million is Rosemary Evans." Confetti cannons exploded. The audience erupted. For a moment, I was completely overwhelmed, the sound and light washing over me. And then I felt a profound, quiet calm. I looked past the cameras, past the cheering crowd, to the front row. David was on his feet, clapping, tears streaming down his face. But Vanessa, she was frozen. Her face was a mask of utter, horrified disbelief. Her perfectly curated world had just been shattered by a simple chicken stew. The host thrust a microphone in my face. "Rosemary, an incredible victory. You were the underdog, the dark horse. Tell America, what is the secret to your cooking?" This was it. The moment I had been waiting for. I picked up Arthur's book from my station. The camera zoomed in on its stained, battered cover. I held it up for the world to see. "My secret," I began, my voice ringing with a strength I never knew I possessed, "is a lifetime of love, poured into the pages of this book. It was written by my late husband, Arthur Evans, the most brilliant chef I have ever known." I paused, and my eyes found Vanessa's. I locked her in my gaze. "It is a book filled with his genius, his passion, and his soul. A book that was once called useless, sentimental junk and thrown into a garbage bag." A collective gasp went through the studio. The cameras, sensing the drama, swiveled from me to a now mortified Vanessa. Her face was chalk white, her mouth slightly agape. She looked trapped, exposed under the glare of a million television screens. I wasn't finished. Tonight, I came here not just to win, but to prove that a legacy of love is never useless. True value isn't measured in what's new and trendy, but in what is timeless and true. This victory is not mine, it belongs to Arthur. The host, sensing the raw, incredible television this was creating, jumped in. "And what will you do with the $1 million, Rosemary?" I'm going to use it to ensure that legacies like Arthur's are never thrown away again, I announced, my voice filled with a newfound purpose. I am going to open a small, non-profit culinary school. It will be dedicated to preserving and teaching the classic techniques, the timeless recipes that are the foundation of all good cooking. It will be called the Arthur Evans School of Hearth Cooking. The applause was deafening. It was a standing ovation. As the confetti rained down, I saw David pushing through the crowd, his face a mess of tears and regret. But my gaze was still on Vanessa. Just before the show cut to commercial, I saw her stand up abruptly, her face contorted in a mask of fury and humiliation, and almost run out of the studio. I had won. I had not only saved Arthur's legacy, I had given it a new, brighter future. I had not stooped to her level. I had risen so far above it that she could no longer even reach me. The sweetest dish I had ever made wasn't the coq au vin, it was justice, and it tasted like victory.